I'd like to share with you 5 most surprising things about interviewing with FANGs or Max 7 based on my experience. I believe the most surprising aspect of these job interviews for most candidates is delay. That is the amount of time it takes for you to land a job offer with these companies. What do I mean by this? Maybe let's take a few examples here. During the screening process, it's not uncommon your screening rounds might be rescheduled, postponed, your interviewer might change, your interviewer might be late to the interview, and these sort of things, which are quite normal even with these companies. And my advice would be not to take these too personal, especially during the early rounds in the process. Later in the process, during the final interview rounds, interviewers will be far more reliable. However, the delay factor will still persist. It's quite common for from the moment you pass a screening round to your final interviews to take 1 month or even longer. Furthermore, once you have your final interview rounds, and assuming they went well, it's not uncommon for them to get back to you only after 1 month with that hopefully favorable outcome. Back in the day, it was not a good sign if it took them a long time to get back to you, but nowadays it's quite common, and even I've had instances where they came back with a job offer after 1 month. What is my tip here? What is my advice to you? Well, as I said, during the early screening rounds, don't take it too personal at all and expect them to be professional during final interview rounds. Furthermore, a tip which I found extremely useful for most candidates would be to try to use this delay to your advantage. That is, if they postpone your final interview rounds, use the time to prepare for the interview instead of, saying that, hey, they're unreliable and it takes too long and these sort of things. The second thing that most first-time candidates are surprised of about job interviews, especially with FANGs, is the culture fit or the leadership interview. Because you see, the assumption is that these companies have some amazing culture and they're quite picky with respect to the types of candidates they choose based on their cultural values, cultural norms, so to speak, such as, your bias for action, your ownership, and these sort of things. In reality, what I found, and I do this for over 8 years now, there are some other things which are far more important than you fit into their culture, namely, to speak clearly, to be intelligible, to show excellence in the work you do, and to show as someone able to deliver. If you match these core behaviors well, the cultural fit interview, the so-called cultural fit, because no one hires for cultural fit in reality, will only be a formality, right? The next thing I'd like to share with you that most candidates are surprised of about job interviews with these FANGs or Max 7 interviews, and usually only after their interviews took place, would be the trick questions, or to put it more broadly, if you want, how your interview actually went versus how you thought it did. Right now, this might be also, counterintuitive. Some interviews you may feel as if you have zero chance to pass them because you got stuck on stuff like that, and then they get back to you with a job offer, because they intentionally put pressure on you. But most of the time, what do I mean by these trick questions? Is that they do have these questions. They don't have those brain teasers. They banned them a long time ago, but they do have 3 questions. For example, are you hands-on or hands-off PM? And what happens if you say you're 90% hands-on and only 10% hands-off, and they're looking for someone towards the hands-off thing? Then you can go through 5 interviews and you basically will be interviewing for nothing because they were looking for a hands-off type of candidate, which they subtly asked you specifically during the job interview. Now, truth be said, this was a little bit of an exaggeration, even though it happens. But most of the time, there will be questions where using your listening skills will be critically important. And the main takeaway here, what I would suggest, would be to stop relying on insider info into these job interviews, because it rarely works when compared to improving your own interviewing skills, especially your listening skills, your critical thinking, and your ability to perform on the spot, right? The next thing that gets a ton of candidates by surprise in these job interviews would be disengaged interviewers. You see, so you as maybe a first-time candidate, you're enthusiastic, you're full of energy, you want to show positivity in your job interviews. However, not everyone will feel the same interviewing, especially with these companies. And I've seen most candidates expect those interviews, hate them, but I would expect it more from such a company, to have interviewers that are more interested in screening you properly and whatnot. No, in reality, there will be some key stakeholders in the process which have all the interest in the world to give their best and to screen you and to interview and to evaluate you to the best of their knowledge, their ability. But some interviewers are only there because they have to, right? So they might look or they might be disengaged in the process, but there's not a sufficient reason for you to also show disengaged in the process. So what I would suggest you would be, to try to do your best to, again, perform regardless of how they feel or how they show during the job interview. No need to make as much eye contact either, if they feel like disengaged. Maybe they want to simply take their notes and move on. These things, right? And the last thing I wanted to share with you that surprised most candidates, and again, only after their interview, and only after you get a job offer, maybe a few months into that role, is the money game that happens in these job interviews. Because you see, these companies are quite smart, and with the job offers in particular. And what happens is that a good number of candidates are perfectly qualified for the role that you're applying for. And these companies, regardless if they're so rich or so high regarded, they have all the interest to hire you. And what happens here is that when you get hired there, most candidates, especially the ones that are super talented, leave money on the table by not preparing those interviews thoroughly. In other words, you make a good enough performance so you land a job offer. What type of job offer, that doesn't really matter to you because your objective is to get in. What happens is that in a few months after getting in, you will realize that, hey, you know what, I could have done 10 times better in this job interviews and negotiated so much better job offer if only I had invested a bit more time into this, or if investing time, resources, and these sort of things. So my advice to you, if you're interviewing with these companies, if you can afford it, of course, consider, investing in your own prep. The best possible professional investment you can make is in yourself, after all. So in my experience, it's well worth, and it pays off to tune up your interviewing skills for the occasion, because if they have an interest to hire you and you perform well during the job interview, that's the absolute best combination to receive the best job offer. I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.